The 2024 NFL season has officially concluded. We have crowned a Super Bowl champion, and now all eyes turn to the 2025 NFL Draft. Today we are going to be going through a two-round mock draft, so we're going to get into some players that we don't usually get into. Probably going to move through the first round pretty quickly since we have discussed a lot of these players, but we're also going to include some trades as well. So let's go ahead and kick this right off, and we have a trade to start out here. I think the Tennessee Titans definitely may consider trading down if they don't love one of the quarterbacks in this class. And there's definitely been rumors that the Giants would be interested in trading up to go get their guy. And I think they feel the pressure to, Joe Shane, Brian Daboll, they need to get their quarterback of the future to try to get this team back on track. So I think that ultimately it's going to take, the second round pick for the Giants this year, as well as potentially like a 2026 second round pick. I don't think they necessarily need to include multiple firsts, because I just don't think this draft has crazy high value at the top, but we're going to go ahead and have the Giants trade up and go get their quarterback. I'm going to go with Cam Ward out of Miami. I think he is ultimately just the guy that, they would want to direct their franchise. I think he's the most talented quarterback in this draft. So I think the Giants go up, get their quarterback of the future, and take him number 1 overall. Next up for the Browns at number 2, just don't think you can go into the year with Deshaun Watson as your starting quarterback. I do think that they would be really intrigued with somebody like Shedeur Sanders. I personally wouldn't take him here, but I do think the Browns are going to feel the pressure to figure out the quarterback position. I think it will be interesting to see, if Myles Garrett does leave, maybe they're more interested in a guy like Abdul Carter. But for now, I do have the Browns taking their quarterback that they hope can be their franchise guy at number 2. And then the Titans at number 3 end up, the first 2 picks are quarterbacks. They can take their favorite non-quarterback off the board, and I think that would be Abdul Carter. He's just got ridiculous explosiveness, playmaking ability, his burst and acceleration off the edge. I think he can be a truly disruptive force at that edge rusher position, something that the Titans do desperately need. And you ultimately trade down and get that guy at number 3. So, you are taking a risk. Maybe the Browns wouldn't take a quarterback here, but I think for the Titans, it does make sense to trade down, collect some more assets, and try to build this roster and not, kickstart your timeline as a GM for Borgonzi with a quarterback that I don't really think should go number 1 overall. Next up for the Patriots at number 4, I think this is a clear pick. Travis Hunter out of Colorado. Whether he is playing cornerback or wide receiver, you definitely need both of those. I think he is kind of a blue chip talent, and even if you prefer getting an offensive lineman or a true number 1 wide receiver, I personally think Hunter is the best receiver in this class if he plays full-time wide receiver. So kind of however you decide to play him. He says he's going to play 2 ways. We'll see if that's the case. Regardless, I think this is a big need, and he's the best player on the board. So makes the most sense for the Patriots to take him there at number 4. Then for the Jaguars at number 5, I'm going to go with Will Johnson out of Michigan. Had a little bit of a down year, but his 2023 tape is fantastic. I think he is a true lockdown number 1 corner that, is deserving of a top 5 selection when he is playing at his best. You already have Tyson Campbell, who's a really nice corner. Pairing the 2 of them together would be a really nice selection for Liam Cohen's kind of first time as the head coach of this team. And I think that you could really solidify the pass defense by getting Will Johnson at number 5. Then at number 6 for the Raiders, definitely think quarterback would be in play if one of the top 2 guys fall, but I just really don't see a world where they reach that desperately on a quarterback, and that kind of leaves probably playmaker on offense that you really need. I think you could go with Ashton Genty if you wanted to add to the running game, but I'm going to go with Tetairoa McMillan out of Arizona. He's ridiculously long, very athletic, runs crisp routes. I think he's a really talented wide receiver prospect. There's kind of varying opinions on how good he is. Some think he is, an AJ Green, can't miss number 1 wide receiver. Others think that he is kind of more of a contested catch. He's a number 1 wide receiver, but maybe not a special one. I am somewhere in the middle of that. I think he's a really good player, probably worth a top 10 pick, but I think for the Raiders at number 6 here, it makes a lot of sense. Pair him with Brock Bowers. I think that could be a really nice passing attack for whoever ends up being their quarterback this year and into the future as well. At number 7, we have the Jets. Pretty much the Jets have told Aaron Rodgers, you are not going to be on the team in 2025. So definitely interesting to see how that changes their draft philosophy, because I don't think Devontae Adams will be there. Garrett Wilson potentially could request a trade if he doesn't like the direction of this team. So wide receiver could absolutely be a big need. Maybe McMillan would be their selection if he was there. But I'm going to go with Mason Graham out of Michigan, pairing him with Quinnen Williams. You've got a strong defensive line. I think that can be the strength and identity of this Aaron Glenn-led defense that, I think he does want to build through the trenches, much like the Lions did in Detroit. And I think that does make a lot of sense for the Jets to continue to add to an area that, they can definitely get better at, but it is a strength of the roster, and it can be that piece of identity for a new regime. Next up at number 8 for the Panthers, you could absolutely take a pass rusher, James Pierce Jr., Mike Green, but I think there's a very real world where the Panthers look at their team, they say, we need a guy to help out Bryce Young in the middle of this offense. And I think that Tyler Warren could absolutely sneak his way into the top 10 here. Warren is a guy who's just kind of can do it all. He's good in contested catch situations, great after the catch. He's an inline blocker. I think he is a complete player and somebody that can really help this offense, especially, over the middle of the field, where I think the Panthers can continue to get better, just adding more weapons for Bryce Young. I could absolutely see Warren going in the top 10, maybe a little bit of a dark horse pick there. Next up for the Saints at number 9, fully expected that Kellen Moore, coming off a Super Bowl championship, is going to be the next head coach of this team. Based on how they've drafted in the past and kind of their areas of need as well, I think a guy they will really like is Shamar Stewart out of Texas A&M. Wasn't the most productive in college when it came to a pass rushing profile, but he was really good at run defense, had all the athletic traits, and he's 280 pounds. He's ridiculously athletic. He can win the outside edge, win with power. At the Senior Bowl, he really started to show a lot of those things off. So you've got to look past the lack of production. But if you can do that, Stewart is an incredibly intriguing player that kind of meets their more traditional thresholds than guys like James Pierce and Mike Green, who are a bit lighter. Then at number 10 for the Chicago Bears, this is an easy pick, but going to go with Will Campbell. Whether he's playing left tackle, one of the interior spots, I think he's one of the best offensive linemen in this class, and getting him here to help solidify the line. Ben Johnson came from a team where the Lions built through the trenches, as we've already said. I think the Bears will want to do that as well, especially after Caleb Williams took a beating last year. Just keeping him upright, allowing him to use his playmaking ability will be priority number 1 for the Bears. So I think Will Campbell just makes a ton of sense for them at number 10. And then at 11, very similar type of thing. I'm going to go with Kelvin Banks out of Texas. Banks is another guy who could play left tackle, one of the interior spots. I think you can just find his best spots on this 49ers offensive line that was decimated by injury a little bit, but Trent Williams is not getting any younger. You've got a lot of question marks really across the entire front. So I think adding Banks, continuing to build through the trenches is a good philosophy for the Shanahan offense, and I do think that makes a lot of sense there. Then at number 12, of course, Ashton Jeanty is the easy pick, but I've made that selection so many times. We're going to go in a slightly different direction here. I'm going to go Mike Green out of Marshall. He had a great Senior Bowl. He's got great explosiveness. His PFF grades are fantastic. He led the country in sacks, and he was just an incredibly productive player for Marshall. And I think for the Cowboys, you need to continue to add pass rush outside of Micah Parsons. There's rumors that he could be traded as well. So I think Mike Green does make sense to bring a lot more juice to that edge rush room, be able to get some pressure on the quarterback, and really help out this defense for Brian Schottenheimer, who I do think has an uphill battle and really, creating a good culture and building this team the right way. But I think adding a talent like Mike Green would definitely be a great step to getting more explosive and being a better defense as well. Next up for the Dolphins, I think you could definitely take Malachi Starks, but that's another pick that I've made a lot. So I'm going to switch it up and go with Armand Membou out of Missouri. Membou played right tackle for Missouri, and he's a guy that's kind of shot up the rankings because his tape is just so steady. He's just incredibly reliable. He's athletic, which I think would fit the Dolphins' kind of outside zone system. He's also a guy that, I think for the Dolphins, their big area of weakness has been kind of on the right side of that line. I think Membou could also be a fantastic guard if you need to put him there, but I think you could kind of plug and play him at right tackle, and I think that would be, huge. He's playing on Tua's blind side, so that right tackle spot is really important. So I think Membou makes a ton of sense to add to this offensive line room, and hopefully you can protect Tua and run the ball a bit better in 2025. Next up for the Colts at number 14, usually I take Tyler Warren here because I love that fit, but another fit I do really like as well is Malachi Starks out of Georgia. He's a safety. I think Blackman just hasn't really been able to stay super healthy. The safety room has just kind of been banged up. I think you can really continue to get some more stability on the back end of that defense. Lou Anarumo, who they hired from the Bengals, the new defensive coordinator there, he definitely places a big time emphasis on communication within his safeties, being able to kind of roll and have more complicated coverages. So I think getting a guy like Malachi Starks makes so much sense for this Colts team. And I think it does fit a big area of need, as well as adding a really quality player as well. Number 15 for the Atlanta Falcons, going to go James Pierce Jr. out of Tennessee. They need to get pass rush. It's been a problem for many years with this team. You just simply have to add some pass rush. And I love James Pierce Jr. He'll probably end up being a top 10 player for me. He really became a much better run defender in 2024, but he was also just a fantastic pass rusher. Didn't have a ton of opportunities due to Tennessee's kind of weird system of rotating pass rushers, but Pierce was really dynamic and productive when he was on the field. He'll hit you on the outside shoulder, win with inside counters. I'm a huge fan of his game, so I think that would be a great selection for the Falcons at number 15. And then at number 16 for the Cardinals, I'm going to go with Jalen Walker out of Georgia. He's kind of a do-it-all Swiss Army knife type of player on the front seven. He played an edge rusher, a decent bit, off-ball linebacker. You can just get really creative with him. I think that's somebody that Jonathan Gannon would really, really like to have on his front seven, use in blitz packages, use off the edge, in coverage, having him drop off in zone blitzes. I think he could definitely be a player you get really creative with. I think the Cardinals would really, really value that on their front seven. Next up at number 17 for the Cincinnati Bengals, I think that, you're bringing out Golden. You need to get tougher on the defensive line. BJ Hill's an upcoming free agent. You pretty much just have Chris Jenkins and McKinley Jackson. Both were rookies this year, and they were okay, but you weren't getting much pass rushing juice at all out of them. Walter Nolan is a player that I think is going to really kind of catapult his way into the top 20, and if he's not already there. He had a 10.9 pass rush win rate, which was a really good mark, but he's a great run defender. I think he's probably best as a penetrating three type of player, but he can hold up at the nose as well. He definitely has kind of alignment versatility, which I think would be big for this Bengals team. Just 21 years old. I really think Nolan would be an ideal selection for this Bengals front. Next up for the Seahawks, offensive line definitely a priority, but I think they have been a little bit picked over because I think interior is really where they need guys like Simmons and Ursary, guys like that are, I think, predominantly tackles. So we're going to go in a slightly different direction and take Mykel Williams out of Georgia. He provides kind of a little bit of a different profile to some of the guys they have, a little bit more of the undersized type of players. Mykel Williams is a true, well-built, long, athletic edge rusher who has tons of physical traits, but he just hasn't put it together with a lot of the production yet. I think he is somebody that could develop into a really nice player given a good situation. And I think, working with Mike McDonald could absolutely be that great situation that could allow him to really flourish in Seattle. Next up, we have the Buccaneers at number 19. And looking at the board here, I do think I am going to go ahead and make it the second trade of this mock draft and trade down with the LA Chargers. And we'll discuss why in a second. But when it comes to the compensation for this, I don't think you have to give up too much. You're just moving up 3 spots. I think you would give up maybe 86 and then get back 119 here. So you're moving up, kind of gaining like 35 spots to drop back. 3 selections here in the first round. So I think that makes sense from a kind of value perspective in what they get back. And then the Chargers go up and get Ashton Genty. You can just see Jim Harbaugh loving a guy like Ashton Genty, somebody who can do it in so many different ways. J.K. Dobbins, an upcoming free agent. Genty was so productive on the ground. His yards after contact was insanely good. Yes, I get it, you're trading up for a running back, but you're also stealing him from the Broncos, who I think would have taken him with the very next selection here. And his receiving ability is really good. He's a good pass protector, but truly what would make him a guy that Harbaugh just loves? He's a bowling ball. He doesn't go down on first contact. He wants to run the ball and run through you. He's so good at breaking tackles, and I think Harbaugh would just be so excited to get a guy like that and move up and go get him. Then at number 20 for the Broncos, I'm going to go with Colston Loveland out of Michigan. I think, with Loveland, he's an athletic, route-running type of guy who's a true mismatch against linebackers. I think he would be a really good player that could open up the middle of this offense. He'd be a really nice connection that I think him and Bo Nix could form. So I think that makes a lot of sense for them to add another dynamic pass-catching weapon. Then for the Steelers at number 21, also going to go to the offensive weapon well here and take Luther Burden out of Missouri. They need some yak ability. Really, for the Steelers, all you've got is George Pickens right now. And, he's pretty much just a contested catch wide receiver, and he disappears far too often. So I'm going to go with Burden here. I think he provides just kind of another element to your offense. Some real yards after catch ability. I think he can be a power slot type of guy and create separation. So I like that selection for the Steelers at number 21. And then for the Buccaneers at number 22, just trade back and go get Benjamin Morrison, who I think absolutely, from a value perspective and how talented he is, could go much higher than this. It's just going to be, is the hip healthy? How is he able to, check out in his medicals? If he is healthy, I think there's a good chance he goes top 15. But in this case, he drops just a little bit, and the Buccaneers are able to take the swing on him in a trade down. I think that makes a lot of sense, adding to that corner room, getting a little bit better when it comes to kind of defending the pass. I liked that a little bit more when it came from a value perspective than taking an edge rusher, which I think you can get down the board. So going to go with Morrison at number 22 here. The Packers up next at number 23. I think that they need to take a wide receiver that can be a true go-to weapon. I know they have, 6 guys who supposedly were all kind of a collective group, but Jordan Love definitely took a step back this year, and I think it's because he didn't have one of those really reliable guys. I think Jaden Reed was kind of an explosive playmaker, but Watson and Dontavian Wicks and those guys have been really inconsistent. So I'm going to go with the model of consistency, and that's Emeka Egbuka, who is just he's a great separator, he's a great route runner, blocks really hard. He can just be a guy who wins super consistently from the slot. The Amon-Ra St. Brown comparison that gets thrown around is a little rich for me, but I think he can be that kind of guy who just on every third down, you look his way because, you just trust that he's going to be in the right spot and that he's going to get open. I think the Packers desperately need that. So I'm going to go with Egbuka at number 23. Then for the Vikings at number 24, an athletic, freaky nose tackle run defender, the Kenneth Grant out of Michigan. He's a guy who just, you don't see many guys move at his size that well, and he does every once in a while rip off a pass rush move that's super exciting to see. Really where he thrives is being a two-gapping run stuffer with athleticism, so he can kind of get to a lot of gaps you don't think he should, and I think for the Vikings, they need to get better defending the run, being able to get tougher up front, so I think that Kenneth Grant selection makes a lot of sense. Then for the Texans at number 25, it's got to be a guard selection. I mean, it absolutely has to be. Kenyon Green was horrible. I'm going to go with Gray Zabel out of North Dakota State, who was fantastic at the Senior Bowl. He was somebody who I do think has 5-position versatility, whether he ends up playing center or guard. Maybe he could play tackle, but I think really his best is going to be on the interior, and I think he would be an excellent selection for them at number 25 to hopefully allow C.J. Stroud to get back to more of his rookie year form and protect him much better than they did this year. Then I think that leads to a good selection for the Rams at number 26 and taking Josh Simmons, who I think for a lot of people could end as, offensive tackle 1 or 2 when it comes to true offensive tackles. And I think for the Rams, Alaric Jackson, Noteboom, those guys have just been a little inconsistent. You don't know how long you're going to have them. So I think getting somebody who, as long as the knee checks out and he's healthy, I think Simmons was a fantastic player that was going to go with a top 15, top 10 pick, and getting him at 26 because of that injury discount is going to be huge, and I think the Rams would be really happy to get that kind of value here at number 26. The Ravens up next. I think that wide receiver could definitely be an area they look, and I'm going to go with Matthew Golden out of Texas. He's a player who definitely had some really big games. He wasn't expected to be the big Texas receiver, but I think he is definitely, pushed himself into that conversation. 987 yards, 9 touchdowns, was really productive for this Texas team. So I think that's where they're going to go. Add another player that can be, a dynamic weapon for Lamar Jackson at 6 foot, 195 pounds. I think he could be a really interesting, another piece to add to that offense. Next up for the Lions at number 28, I've taken Jack Sawyer to them many times before. I absolutely could see that. But I'm going to go in a slightly different direction and take Tyler Booker out of Alabama. They definitely could lose Kevin Zeitler. They dealt with some injuries on the interior as well. I think Booker is kind of a plug-and-play guard that they would really like. He definitely is, pretty consistent when it comes to pass protection. I just think that getting younger and talented on the interior of that offensive line, that's been an identity for this team, and I think you continue to replenish the well there because you do have some older injury-prone type players in those spots. Then at number 29 for the Commanders, I am going to take Jack Sawyer here. I think they need to add to the pass rush. A lot of those guys stepped up and played better than you ever would have expected, but you didn't have any of your kind of star pass rushers. I think Sawyer is kind of more of probably a really high floor number 2 type of rusher, but he plays with great efforts. He's a high character guy. He's just got a fantastic motor, great speed to power. So I think he could be a very valuable player for Washington at the very end of the first round here. Then we have the Bills at number 30. I am going to go with Jahad Campbell out of Alabama. Campbell is somebody who came in as an edge rush prospect. They moved to off-ball linebacker. I think you could be creative with how you use him. Von Miller's not getting any younger. I do think he can play on the edge some and then be that off-ball linebacker. Matt Milano also dealt with a bunch of injuries, has gotten up there in age as well. So I think Campbell makes a lot of sense at number 30. Then at number 31 for the Chiefs, offensive tackle was bad in the Super Bowl. And you're not just drafting based on the Super Bowl, but I'm going to go with Ariante Ursary out of Minnesota. They just have not been able to get the tackle position right. I know they keep taking tackles, but you can see why. In the Super Bowl, they just got ran over by that Eagles front. And Ursary brings size and kind of the natural tackle build that I think you could hope to get a franchise level left tackle out of him at the end of the first round here. And then for the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles, going to continue to add to the offensive line. We'll see what happens when it comes to, guys that come back, all that kind of stuff. But Mekhi Becton, on that right guard spot, I definitely think that he's probably going to get paid elsewhere. So a guy I really like to replace him is Wyatt Milam out of West Virginia. He played tackle, but I think he's going to be best at guard. 92.6 pass blocking grade, 89.7 run blocking grade. You really can't ask for too much better than that. I think he was a little bit up and down at the Senior Bowl learning the guard spot, but I think he's going to be in a really good place once he takes more reps there, has great grip strength, and I think can be really effective on the inside. Moving on to the second round now, and I am actually going to have the Titans trade out of the number 33 pick here and have the New England Patriots trade up. I'm going to give them 36. It's just a 3-pick difference here, so not going to be anything too crazy. Would probably just take like a 5th round pick to go ahead and move up and make that selection here. So, might take this one here at 104. Maybe they give back like 168 or something like that. Doesn't have to be an exact science, but we'll go with that here because I think the Patriots want to come up and get a guy like Josh Connerly, the tackle out of Oregon, to be the left tackle of their future. I just don't think that Caden Wallace or any of the guys in the building right now. I think Connerly just would be kind of the plug-and-play left tackle. And I think overall had really good tape, and you just have to add playmakers and offensive line talent around Drake May. So being aggressive for the Patriots, going up and getting your tackle to, protect Drake May's blind side, I think makes a lot of sense. Then for the Browns at number 34, going to go with Omarion Hampton out of North Carolina. Love that Nick Chubb was able to come back and compete, but he's just not the same type of player post-injury. And, as unfortunate as that is, I think getting somebody like Hampton to come in, be a big bruising back with great contact balance, pass protecting ability, would be a great complement to the running game. And being able to get him in there and Shedeur Sanders kind of transform the identity of this offense, I think that makes a lot of sense. Then for the Titans, we have 2 picks in a row, 35 and 36. And I'm going to go ahead and first up take Jahdae Barron out of Texas. He's a player that I think is very scheme versatile. I think he's somebody that, played a bunch of different positions at Texas, and that has allowed him to be incredibly instinctual. And I think that they could definitely add his ability on the back end of that defense. And then with pick number 36, I am going to have them go ahead and take Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State, the wide receiver. He's somebody that has looked super crisp in his releases. He's really tall, but he's very athletic as well. 6'4", 215 pounds. He's shown he can win contested catch situations. You can see 58.3% here, but he also separates pretty well for a guy his size, and wouldn't be at all surprised if he ends up going early here on day 2. For the Jacksonville Jaguars up next, going to go with Tyleik Williams out of Ohio State. They need to add kind of to the front end of that defense, the middle of the defense, and I think Tyleik Williams makes a lot of sense to be able to get better against the run. Williams is just a true two-gapping, just rock against the run, and I think that's something the Jaguars desperately need, so it makes a lot of sense for them at number 37 there. Then for the Raiders, I'm going to take Trey Amos out of Ole Miss. He's somebody that, is very long, athletic, 6'1", 190 pounds. Thought he looked really good in the Senior Bowl, one of the better players there. An 85.6 coverage grade. Thought that, he just showed up really well for Ole Miss, was a sticky man corner, and somebody that I definitely think the Raiders could use. You get Tetairoa McMillan in the first round, adding a guy on the other side on the defense that can cover guys like McMillan for other teams would be big. Next up, we have the Jets at number 39. I think quarterback has to be in play here, and, to me, I think Jalen Milroe is kind of the most toolsy quarterback with his rushing ability, but he looked not great at the Senior Bowl. Based on the conversation, I'm not here at all, but I think Jackson Dart is the most likely to be quarterback 3. He did have great PFF grades. I think he is kind of a one-read quarterback. I really hope that he wouldn't be in a situation where he has to start, but I think that there's absolutely a world in which he goes pretty high, and I'm going to have the Jets take him at number 39 to potentially be their quarterback of the future. Then at number 40 for the Chicago Bears, I'm going to go with Nick Gordon out of Texas A&M. Don't think he's a bad player by any means, but definitely didn't live up to the top 10 hype he was getting in the preseason based on his tape at Purdue. Texas A&M, he just wasn't super productive. I think he was playing a little heavier than I would want him to be playing at. I think if he slimmed down a little bit, got some of that explosiveness back and ability to attack the outside edge, I think he could be a really nice player. You've already got Montez Sweat on one side, so getting a guy like Nick Gordon to play across from him, I think would be an ideal scenario, and getting him at number 40 would be a pretty good value as well. Next up, we have the Saints, and I'm going to go with Savon Rovell out of East Carolina, another guy who, much like Benjamin Morrison, who we talked about before, would probably be going much higher if it weren't for an injury. Rovell got hurt early in the season and then, hasn't been able to play since. For the Saints, I think they can add to that corner room. You lost Marshawn Lattimore in a trade to the Commanders, so getting younger, Rovell is really long, athletic, very talented type of player, so I think getting him with the injury discount makes a lot of sense for this team. Then for the Bears, once again, I'm going to go with a running back here. I think that the identity of the Ben Johnson offense was getting strong in the trenches and being able to run the football. And I don't love the running backs on this roster. DeAndre Swift has some of the worst vision I've ever seen. We're going to go with a true one-cut downhill type of runner in Caleb Johnson. You could argue Cam Scatterby if you wanted the contact balance, but I think Caleb Johnson kind of perfectly fits what this Bears offense would like. The one-cut, good contact balance, stick your foot in the ground, big power and athleticism. Johnson was incredibly productive at Iowa, and I think that makes a lot of sense for the Bears here to kind of establish the running game. Then for the 49ers, I'm going to go with the defensive line and take Landon Jackson out of Arkansas. He's somebody that played well in the Senior Bowl game, didn't have the best practice week, but played well in the game, has been productive, 7 sacks in the last 2 seasons. He's a really great run defender, and I think that would be the draw with him. He has great size. He's 6'7" or so, 280 pounds. So there's a lot of physical traits to work with, and pairing him with Nick Bosa could be an interesting thing for this 49ers front. Then for the Cowboys, he's passed on Ashton Jeanty in the first round. We'll go ahead and take Cam Scatterby in the second round out of Arizona State. Just so difficult to tackle. He's a bowling ball, so low to the ground. He's good in the receiving game as well. Great contact balance. Just somebody that I think the Cowboys would be very happy to get at number 44. And I think this kind of shows the argument for maybe why Jeanty might fall a little bit is because you can get really quality running backs here in the second round. Next up for the Dolphins, I think safety is a big need for them, especially if Javon Holland leaves. And we're going to go with Nick Emanwari out of South Carolina. He's kind of more of a box safety type of player. You can see with his alignments. He lined up all over the field, 414 snaps in the box, 193 deep, 146 in the slot. He's kind of your do-it-all type of defender. I think, he allows you to play a lot more nickel because he can come up and be a really big physical presence in the running game. I think that's what you're looking for with him. 6'3", 227 pounds, still super young as well. So could be a really interesting player for the Dolphins, and you can definitely get very creative with him in the back end of your defense. Then for the Colts at number 46, I'm going to go with Demetrius Knight out of South Carolina. He's an interesting player, had a good Senior Bowl week. I think, you look at his stats, 85.8 run defense grade, was very productive. I think he's, somebody that can rush the passer a little bit, is pretty decent in coverage. He's a player that can just kind of fly all over the field. To me, EJ Speed, Zaire Franklin have not been good enough for this Colts linebacker core. I think adding another player in the middle of that defense could be, what the Colts need to get much tougher on the defensive side of the football. Next up for the Atlanta Falcons, going to go with Azareye'h Thomas out of Florida State. He is a very physical press man corner. I think he had, a little bit of an up and down Senior Bowl week, but he definitely had an up and down season as well at Florida State, just with how bad they were. But 6'2", 198 pounds, 20 years old. He's somebody that definitely has a ton of potential to turn into a really nice player. And pairing him with A.J. Terrell, I like that combination, especially after getting some pass rush juice in the first round with James Pierce Jr., continuing to help that pass defense and adding to the defense for Raheem Morris's team here. I do like that addition. Then for the Cardinals up next, going to go with the interior defensive line, and there's still some really good ones on the board. We're going to go with Derek Harmon out of Oregon. He's a guy that played at Michigan State, was really good against the run, shedded a little bit of weight, and really became a dynamic pass rusher. And I think, once again, the Cardinals' front seven is really where they thrive. Getting creative, using good blitzes, understanding where and when to attack, and use creativity. I think Harmon would continue to add to that. They're not a great defensive line when it comes to name recognition or talent level, so adding someone like Harmon I think would be really big. Then at number 49 for the Cincinnati Bengals, I think somebody that they would love is Xavier Watts out of Notre Dame. They just took Notre Dame's defensive coordinator, Al Golden, to be their defensive coordinator. Geno Stone was really bad for this team last year. 89.5 coverage grade for Watts, bringing over his leadership and, just his playmaking ability from Notre Dame. I think this just is a really good fit and definitely one that if he's there, I think the Bengals would be very interested in here in round 2. Next up for the Seahawks, I'm going to take, like I promised, offensive line help, and we are going to go with, I think he's actually listed as a tackle now, Donovan Jackson out of Ohio State. Was a left guard for pretty much his entire career at Ohio State. Kicked out to tackle out of necessity and was great at it. Only allowed one pressure, I believe, the entire playoffs, and that was to James Pierce Jr. out at tackle. So he has some of that inside-outside flexibility. I think he has a little bit heavier feet. He's going to be better in the interior, I think, in the NFL, but I think that's where the Seahawks need the most help anyway. So it's nice to have that versatility if they need it in an emergency situation, but I think Jackson would be a really good offensive line pick at number 50 there. Then the Buccaneers, they took corner in the first round and Benjamin Morrison, and being able to get a guy like Donovan Iziraku in the second round here, incredibly productive, has great bend, great pass rush arsenal. He's just a little bit undersized, but he does have really good arm length, so he kind of mitigates that a little bit. Not a great run defender, but definitely kind of that pass rushing specialist that I think they could definitely be interested in. At number 52 for the Broncos, I'm going to go with a wide receiver. We had them taking Colston Loveland in the first round, but I think, there's a lot of really good players on this team, and Jack Besh was the MVP of the Senior Bowl. He had a fantastic week. He's just a guy who I think is probably going to go higher than this. It's just kind of difficult to find a place, but he's a good blocker, doesn't drop the football, great in contested catch situations. He's overcome a lot of adversity this year as well. 6'2", 215 pounds. I love everything about Jack Besh's game and his ability. I do think he will likely go higher than this, but I think if he's there for the Broncos, that would be a very good selection for them to continue to add weapons around Bo Nix. Then at number 53 for the Steelers, they tend to like big, physical, athletic type of corners, and we're going to go there next with Darian Porter out of Iowa State. He's not the best when it comes to his run defense grade. You can see that here, but zone coverage, his overall coverage grade is really good, and then 6'4", 200 pounds. And, he's wicked fast as well. Yes, he's going to have to develop some of those, man coverage, physical instincts, but I think with the size, there's not a ton of corners here that I love, and maybe the Steelers don't end up going with that position, but I think that, he kind of fits the mold of the long, fast, athletic type of corners that they tend to like, and you can get him to, play a little bit more physical. I think he can be a really nice player for you. And then for the Chargers at number 54, you traded up and got Ashton Genty. We're going to go with Alec Iambanner out of Stanford, who is another really good run blocker. I think that he, Jack Besh would make a ton of sense for this team if he was somehow there. He fits the identity, but 6'2", 210 pounds. He's young. He absolutely cooked Travis Hunter, not this past year, but the year before that when they went up against each other. So he's somebody I'm high on. I do really like him, and at pick 54, I think that would be a very good value. Then up next for the Packers, I think they need to add to the edge rush room, getting physical. I think they need to get better there. And Jordan Burch is a really interesting player. He had a 15.7 pass rush win rate, which was really good. His run defense grade isn't amazing listed, but he's 6'6", 295 pounds. The dude can set the edge. He's physical in the running game. I do like Jordan Burch, and I think he's definitely not the same player, but he's kind of in the mold, the build of a guy like Rashawn Gary, who I think the Packers did get a lot of good play out of before he really kind of dealt with a ton of injuries. So I think Burch's would be a very interesting selection for them at 55. Then for the Bills at number 56, we're going to go TJ Sanders out of South Carolina, continuing to get guys that can rush the passer and, be dynamic on the interior. You look at his stats, had 5 sacks, 9 hits, 19 hurries. He was really disruptive from the interior, and, maybe he's a little bit redundant with a guy like Ed Oliver, but I think pairing the two of them together, especially in, obvious third down passing situations, that would make them really, really difficult to block on the pass rush. Next up for the Texans, going to go back to the defensive tackle well and look at Omar Norman-Lott here out of Tennessee. 18.8 pass rush win rate. He was a fine run defender, but really where he thrived is rushing the passer, being an explosive pass rusher there. 6'3", 315 pounds. He's somebody that I really liked, and he didn't play a ton of snaps, but was still ridiculously productive. So I really like Norman Lott, and I think he would be a big addition to that D'Amico Ryans-led defense. Next up for the Panthers, they need a pass rusher. They really don't have any on this team. You could take a guy like JT Tuimoloau, who I think gives you a high floor, but Princely McMillan out of Ole Miss, he had 11 sacks. He's a guy with ridiculous bend and pass rushing juice, 22.8 pass rush win rate. I think he's a perfect fit, and this is kind of the range where I'm comfortable taking him. I think he is a little bit one-dimensional. I don't think he wins with a lot of power or is great against the running game, but he is a true pass rushing specialist, and he's really, really good in that area, and that's exactly what the Panthers need. So I think that fit makes a lot of sense, and this is a good value for him as well at 58. For the Ravens up next, I am going to have them take JT Tuimoloau out of Ohio State. He's a very high floor, really good run defender, brings some physicality. He's, very much an AFC North type of player and somebody that, brings just, that very high floor. He's probably not going to be a bendy, big-time 10-sack type of player, but I think you get great run defense out of him. He brings a speed-to-power element. He plays really hard, has a great motor, so I think that makes a lot of sense for them at number 59. Then for the Lions at number 60, going to go with Kyle Kennard out of South Carolina. They need a pass rusher to go next to Aiden Hutchinson, provide just a little bit more stability on that defensive line, especially, if he is a little bit slower coming back from injury. So what beat them against the Commanders was just not being able to get a stop and not being able to create pressure and make Jaden Daniels uncomfortable. So adding another pass rusher like Kennard makes sense to me. Moving on to number 61 for the Commanders. We had them taking Sawyer in the first round. Going to go back to the trenches, but this time on the offensive side of the ball with Cam Williams out of Texas. He's actually, ironically, the one that Sawyer beat for the strip sack fumble that moved Ohio State into the national championship game. But Williams is a very traitsy player. He does have a little bit slower feet, but I think, he has some really nice things. He's very powerful. You're not usually going to be bursting through him, and he definitely is the type of right tackle that you could see being a really good player. And for the Commanders, I think the offensive line played really well this year, but probably outperformed expectations a little bit. So I think adding more talent to that tackle room would be a big-time help for this offensive line. Next up for the Bills at number 62, I think continuing to add to the wide receiver room is something they can continue to do. And you could take a guy like Xavier Restrepo. I could see him going in this spot. I'm a huge fan of Jalen Royals. His yards after catch ability is really good. I like his ability as a downfield threat. I just think that he is an underrated player in this draft cycle. And for the Bills, adding more playmakers is always a good thing. And I think Royals would be a nice addition to this wide receiver room. Then the last two picks here, we've got the Chiefs and the Eagles. I am going to go with another Senior Bowl riser in Darius Alexander out of Toledo. 12.8 pass rush win rate, a 90.3 run defense grade, 4 sacks in the interior. You had Chris Jones go down with injury. Hopefully it's not too serious, but I think you need to get better at, having a complement next to him, and Alexander could be a really interesting guy. Another player, Quinyon Mitchell, who was big for the Eagles on their Super Bowl run. He's somebody that came out of Toledo, rose during the Senior Bowl, and was a great player. I think Alexander is going to have definitely not going as high as Mitchell, but a similar type trajectory where, he's a small school guy, but showed out against really good competition and will climb up the draft board a bit. So have him going to the Chiefs at number 63. And then for the Eagles at number 64, I will be curious. They likely will lose Josh Sweat to a team that can pay him a lot more money, but that makes me kind of interested in getting a pass rusher, and I think they could use kind of that hybrid type of player, like a guy like Josiah Stewart, who is a true pass rusher, a 27.3 pass rush win rate, 92.3 pass rushing grade. You can take him off the field on, rundowns, but really where he thrives is just blowing past offensive tackles on the edge. He can drop back into coverage every once in a while. He's very athletic. So to me, he's the type of player that I think would be a nice addition to the trenches on this Eagles team. You have to have the other guys that, can play around him, but I think Stewart, absolutely, that makes sense, and I think he could be a really good player for this Eagles team. So that's going to do it for my 2-round 2025 post-Super Bowl mock draft. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you like this kind of content, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button while you're down there as well. Both those things just truly do help support the channel. I'm going to be putting out tons more draft content, player rankings, scouting evaluations, mock drafts, all that good stuff, so you won't want to miss it. Thank you so much for watching. I will catch you in the next one.